Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was among the first world leaders to send Donald Trump a message congratulating him for his election as the 47th President of the United States. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Within minutes of Donald J. Trump's declaration of victory as the 47th President of the United States, Prime Minister Netanyahu became among the first world leaders to congratulate the president-elect. Netanyahu posted, "Congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America." Israelis generally celebrated the news of the election of Trump. The news came this morning, Israel time, after major TV networks declared his victory over Vice President Kamala Harris. There were few countries in the world that watched the U.S. election results as closely as in Israel. According to the polls, most Israelis favored Trump, who is remembered for moving the U.S. embassy and promoting the Abraham Accords during his first presidency.
I think it's good for Israel, yeah, no doubt. It's better than Kamala Harris, but it's very good for Israel because he proved the last time he was a president, he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and everything that he said, he did. Yeah, so it's good for Israel, no doubt.
I think it's going to be a new era for the world, for the Middle East, for Israel. Things going to change.
There are concerns among many in Israel that the Biden administration, while supportive of Israel since the start of the war, also had considerable criticism of how Israel was conducting the war in Gaza. President Biden will remain in office until January 20th, and it's unclear how the election could impact U.S. policy between now and when Trump takes office.
So we are here in California, where we saw Americans queuing to vote in this U.S. presidential election until really the last minute of the polls. Later in the night, we did see that Donald Trump was victorious in the election. However, there were some surprises in terms of the election turnout. The Jewish community is traditionally a strong Democratic voting bloc. However, we saw in this election that 43%, an estimated 43% so far of the Jewish community supported Trump. That's the highest number from the American Jewish community since 1980. In addition to that, we also saw surprising support and turnout from the Latino community for now President-elect Donald Trump. In addition to that, we saw that in the exit polls, whereas economy is traditionally the most important issue to American voters, we saw that the state of democracy was actually listed as the most important concern for Americans, with the majority of them viewing Donald Trump as a better candidate to respect American democracy. The issues after democracy that were the most important to Americans were, of course, economy in number 2, followed by immigration, abortion, and foreign policy only in 4%. This, of course, running in stark contrast to what we have seen from the far left and the anti-Israel groups claiming that the Gaza war is a major issue in this election cycle. Now, that being said, we have seen some protests already popping up across the country. In New York City last night, we saw anti-Israel protesters gathering and burning Israeli flags outside of the Fox News headquarters. However, thus far, we haven't seen any activities like that here on the ground in California. But of course, we'll keep you updated with every event happening here on the ground in this U.S. election. Back to you, Lidar.
All right, thank you, Emily, on the ground in California.
As Israeli efforts to reach a ceasefire in Lebanon continue, joining us to discuss the situation and what we can expect in the coming days is former Knesset member and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, Ksenia Svetlova. Thank you so much for joining us, Ksenia. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'd like to start by asking you about Lebanon and the Prime Minister's recent statement that with or without a ceasefire, the IDF will continue to push back Hezbollah past the Litani. Do you think it's possible to achieve a ceasefire with the IDF even expanding operations in Lebanon?
Well, I can tell you frankly that I hear for the last few weeks information about the upcoming ceasefire, and it seems to me very unlikely. It seems very unlikely because, first of all, despite some of the IDF goals that were achieved, it is very clear that Hezbollah is still an organic part of the Lebanese fabric, that it is not going anywhere, and that it is resilient in its objection to the realization and implementation of the 1701 UN resolution. So until there is a clear understanding that this is the basically assumption that the IDF goes back when Lebanon starts to implement the 1701 with some international supervision, of course, and so on. And the IDF has some opportunity to go back if things go wrong. Unlike the last time, there can be no ceasefire. That's just a logical outcome.
Thus far, Hezbollah has rejected ceasefire efforts, as Israel, you mentioned, would demand freedom to act militarily in southern Lebanon if need be. Why is this so critical? Can you explain a bit more about why it's so important, given what we've seen from UNIFIL and from Lebanon, or what we haven't seen from Lebanon in the past almost 2 decades?
Well, when we are looking at this almost 20 kilometers band between the Israeli border and between the Litani River, it's important to understand that it all became one huge military base. Israel was aware of some of the activities, of much of the activities that were going on there, but even the IDF commanders who had the information about it, they were surprised of the volume, of the scope of what happened during the last 18 years, since the Lebanese war in 2006. When we are when we are discussing the pushing back the Hezbollah beyond the Litani, what does it actually mean? Because we are speaking about villages such as Kafr Kile, Aita Shab, and many, many others, Maruna Ras, of course, Bin Jbeil, that they are comprised, the population is comprised of Hezbollah fighters and their families. So even if the fighters themselves will go back 20 kilometers, how we will prevent their going back to their homes? We are talking about their homes. So these are not foreign fighters. These are part of the fabric of the southern Lebanon. Emily, I've been to Lebanon as a journalist twice. And I can tell you that, it was before the 1701 was adopted, but it was very, very clear that at that time, it was 2005, 2006, there was no power in Lebanon that could effectively disarm Hezbollah, because that's what needs to happen. Hezbollah needs to be disarmed beyond Litani, around Litani, in all of the Lebanon, because Hezbollah fighters also hide in northern Lebanon. They try to go to Christian villages that actively fight, try to push them back. So basically, we have to talk not only about this very narrow issue of pushing back beyond the Litani. How does Lebanon and how does the world disarm Hezbollah on the Lebanon sovereign territory and returns the sovereignty to the Lebanese state? Is there a state? Can we talk really about something that is somebody that can take responsibility over there? For now, unfortunately, I do not see such element.
We're also hearing rumors that the regime in Iran may be using proxies to carry out a more complex and more aggressive counterattack on Israel, perhaps even in the coming days. Would this be impacted at all by a ceasefire, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza, or we see it as completely unrelated to the Islamic Republic efforts against the State of Israel?
Well, I think that we did hear in the past from various Iranian representatives, it was back in August, that if there will be a deal over Gaza, then they will reconsider perhaps their reaction. But I would suggest to everybody not to build on that too much. because Iranians, by now, they have their own score. They, it's not only about Lebanon. It's not only about Gaza. It's about their projected strength and power over their proxies and in the region in general. So we are speaking not only about, how they will retaliate over Hania or Sinwar or Nasrallah or whoever. Right now, this is the survival, basically, of the Iranian created the fire of ring, which they took proud for a long time around Israel, and their ability to manage successfully their proxies around the Middle East. I think that if there will be a ceasefire, there will, of course, there will be some pressures, perhaps, from the world and so on, to maybe wait or to make this reaction milder. But in any case, I think that, the Iranians are now on this revenge mission. And I think that Israel has to be very smart about it, strong about it, and not to count on any occasions such as possible ceasefire that, I do not see it coming. And if it will be coming, it might be a big mistake.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you, Ksenia Svetlova, for your analysis today.
Thank you.
The Islamic Republic of Iran is preparing an elaborate attack on Israel that could come at any moment now. Let's see more of the latest on the Iranian threat.
According to new diplomatic messages, the Islamic regime is planning a complex attack on Israel that will include the use of more powerful warheads than they used previously. The regime also intends to use the Iranian army to carry out the attacks. Iranian sources claim the attack will most likely take place after the U.S. election, but prior to the inauguration of a new president. In response to the threats from Iran, the U.S. government has been firmly committed to Israel's defense. On Thursday, CENTCOM Commander General Kurila visited Israel in solidarity and held a situational assessment with the IDF in addition to the THAAD missile defense systems that the U.S. sent to bolster Israel's security. As the threat from Iran looms over Israel, the regime has ramped up internal suppression while the world's attention has been on Gaza and Lebanon. In October alone, a record 166 executions took place in Iran. Overnight, the regime also executed a 20-year-old Iranian Jewish man, Arvin Garamani, who was on death row for being a non-Muslim who defended himself against a Muslim knife-wielding attacker. The execution also falls on the anniversary of the start of the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979, when radical mobs stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took dozens of Americans hostage for 444 days. Every anniversary, the regime holds celebrations of this event by burning American flags and chanting "Death to America," and this year is no exception, with more disturbing scenes from Iran. This follows Khamenei's recent comments threatening not only Israel, but the United States as well.
And on the eve of the U.S. election, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. While the two had been at odds for quite some time, the announcement came as a surprise, prompting anti-government protests overnight. ILTV's Ariella Lehiani joins us now with the full story. Ariella, what can you tell us?
Yes, thank you, Ladas. I'm here now in Tel Aviv in the same spot where just last night thousands of Israelis gathered to protest Netanyahu's decision to fire Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Now, this is, of course, a very controversial move, specifically during a time of a multi-front war. However, it is no secret that the two have been at odds for many, many months, and this is, in fact, the second time Gallant has been fired. And just as we are seeing now, we saw then many protests erupt across the country. Take a look at more in the following report. In a surprise announcement, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant Tuesday night, citing a crisis of trust.
בעיצומה של מלחמה, יותר מתמיד, נדרש אמון מלא בין ראש הממשלה לשר הביטחון. ולצערי, אף שבחודשים הראשונים של המערכה היה אמון כזה, והייתה עבודה מאוד פוריה, במהלך החודשים האחרונים, האמון הזה נסדק. ביני לבין שר הביטחון גלנט התגלו פערים משמעותיים בניהול המערכה, והפערים הללו נולדו בהצהרות, בפעולות שמנוגדות להחלטות הממשלה ולהחלטות הקבינט.
The Prime Minister said even though many attempts were made to bridge the gaps, they kept getting wider, adding that this crisis of trust did not allow the proper continuation of the management of the war. Netanyahu announced that Foreign Minister Israel Katz has been appointed to replace Gallant as Defense Minister, while New Hope Party leader Gideon Saar would replace Katz as foreign minister. Gallant and Netanyahu have publicly clashed for months over the objectives of the ongoing war in Gaza and in Lebanon. During this time, there were multiple reports in Israeli media that Netanyahu was considering replacing him. After being fired, Gallant addressed the country and said he was fired over his stance on 3 issues: the ultra-Orthodox draft legislation, the imperative to bring home the hostages, and the creation of a state commission of inquiry into the October 7th massacre. Gallant ended his televised statement by paying tribute to the IDF.
כאן, במעמד הזה, אני מבקש להצדיע לנופלים ולבני משפחותיהם, לפצועים ולנכים, לחטופים ולמשפחותיהם, וללוחמי צה"ל באשר הם. אני סומך עליכם ואני מצדיע לכם.
And it's day 396 of the war in Gaza. Hamas has announced that Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of its slain leader Yahya Sinwar, will be the terror group's new commander. And with the announcement also came the Hamas rejection of ceasefire proposals. ILTV's Devo Klein reports.
The war continues in Gaza. On the ground, the Nahal Brigade combat team is operating in the Rafah area. During the last day, the forces located hundreds of weapons, including rocket launchers, RPG missiles, and explosives, while eliminating terrorists and destroying terrorist infrastructure. According to the Israeli public broadcaster, since the killing of his brother, Mohammed Sinwar has been acting as the de facto head of Hamas military wing, alongside a small council of top commanders. The U.S. State Department announced that Hamas had rejected a proposal for a short-term ceasefire and hostage release deal, indicating that the terror group was refusing to budge from its key demand for a withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, even after the killing of its leader, Yahya Sinwar, last month. Meanwhile, in a decision that will impact aid distribution in Gaza, Foreign Minister Katz has announced the Israeli exit from an agreement reached with UNRWA in 1967. Last week, the Knesset voted to end UNRWA activities inside Israel, leading Katz to declare the end of an agreement signed in 1967 after the Six-Day War, allowing the group to operate in Gaza and other territories captured in the war. Israel cites UNRWA's alleged terror ties and says it now plans to redirect Gaza aid to non-terror-linked organizations. The move by Israel could result in a legal confrontation with the Palestinians at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Additionally, it is likely to provoke diplomatic backlash against Israel with the UN General Assembly.
There's been heavy incoming Hezbollah rocket and drone fire targeting northern Israel throughout the day with more than 100 projectiles. The IDF also reported Sunday afternoon that one resident of Nahariya in northern Israel has died from his injuries from a Hezbollah rocket fired last week. About 10 rockets targeted the western Galilee region and another 10 targeted Haifa Bay this morning. 25 launches were detected entering the Golan Heights. The Air Force successfully intercepted most of the launches, and the rest fell in open areas with no new injuries having been reported, though rockets have continued throughout the day in multiple barrages.
Over the past 24 hours, 130 rockets and 10 drones were fired at Israel. An IDF helicopter downed a drone south of Haifa. 6 of the drones came from Lebanon, 3 from Iraq, and the IDF is still uncertain of the origin of the 10th UAV. The IDF said that Hezbollah are left with about 30% of the drones it had at the start of the war. Most rockets and drones are downed by air defense or fall in open areas, but some are making impact. Over the weekend, in one of the most damaging strikes since the start of the war, 3 rockets struck a home in the Arab-Israeli town of Tira, wounding 19 people. Relatives and friends mourned Israeli farmer Omer Weinstein, who was killed along the northern border by a shell along with 4 Thai farm workers. One friend attending the funeral was former Defense Minister Benny Gantz.
תמיד אזכור את החיוך הענק של עומר, את אהבת הארץ ואת היחסים המיוחדים שהיו לו עם אביו. כמה כאב, אבא גיבור, וכעת גם אבא כאוב, כואב, קובר את בנו האהוב והגיבור.
Well, we are in day 394 of the war in Gaza, with heavy clashes reported in Jabalia, resulting in Israeli casualties. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has the report.
The IDF named 2 soldiers killed in combat in Jabalia in northern Gaza. The fallen are from the Givati Brigade. They are Staff Sergeant Itai Parizat, 20, from Petach Tikva, and Staff Sergeant Yair Chananya, 22, from Mitzpeh Netofa. A third Givati soldier was severely wounded. IDF troops continue intensified operations in the Gaza Strip. In Jabalia, air and ground forces conducted targeted raids on military installations, killing dozens of Hamas terrorists. In central Gaza, troops uncovered a weapons manufacturing plant underground and in the heart of a civilian area. The 252nd Division forces located and destroyed the factory for the production of weapons in the center of the Gaza Strip. And in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, the IDF eliminated Hamas's national relations head, Izzadin Kassab. He was one of the last remaining members of the terrorist group's political bureau, still alive inside the Palestinian enclave. And with Israeli cooperation, the final phase of a two-stage polio vaccination campaign has started in North Gaza. The second phase was postponed in October by U.S. agencies due to intense Israeli bombardments, mass displacement, and a lack of access to the region. And for the first time in weeks, Gaza terrorists managed to fire 2 missiles at Israel from Gaza, setting off red alerts. They fell in open areas without causing damages.
And today, universities and colleges across the country have begun the academic year, the second year in a row amid the ongoing Gaza war. ILTV's Arya Lalachiani is at Tel Aviv University with more.
Yes, thank you, Emily. So today, November 3rd, marks the beginning of the academic year for universities across the country. And this is now the second year in a row where thousands of students are beginning their school year with the war ongoing. We have seen thousands of students serve in the reserves duty. Last year, 1 in 5 students were serving in the reserves, which amounted to around 70,000 students. And I'm here now at Tel Aviv University, where already 1,600 out of 30,000 students are serving in the reserves. However, universities are ensuring that they are doing everything they can to support all students financially, emotionally, and also academically to ensure they are completing the academic year successfully.
On one hand, we're extremely excited. There's a full festival here. Well, we want to start studying. On the other hand, it's extremely hard because we are still in the war. There are a lot of reserve soldiers that are trying to study and balance between all the things.
And it's super important to contribute to the army. I'm so proud of what I did. I wouldn't change it, but I know that it has some personal costs. Like I'm looking on the first year. And at my grades, and now I barely passed all my courses. I hope I will be able to pass this year as well. And yeah, we're trying our best.
Head of the university and the professors here, their sons and daughters or their grandchildren are also reserve soldiers in some way or another. We're all in the same boat, so they're truly helping us.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.